Hello.
Hi, Kevin.
And
Hello.
Hello.
the room is all yours.
Yes,
Pick your own seat.
it's all yours, actually.
All right, I think we are pretty much on time here.
It's good to see folks in the room. But thanks everyone for coming. This is IETF 113, the CDNI session. Um, we'll go ahead and get started. Sanjay, next slide, please.
All right.
This is the note well. Everyone should be familiar with it. Your participation is governed by the documents listed here. So you agree by participating to follow all of these guidelines. I'm sure everyone's seen it and read it. Next slide, please. This is a hybrid meeting, so just some reminders for folks. There's some folks in the room, some joining remotely. Some tips on connecting and making sure that you are in the blue sheets. When you're not presenting, please turn off your video and audio just to help us save on the bandwidth. Next slide, please. We will be using Meet Echo for all of the queuing, even if you're in the room. So make sure that you are on the tool and you're logged in. Next slide, please. For remote participants, you are here with us on Meet Echo. So hopefully you know how to use the tool, use the queue, use your video and audio. Blue sheets are being tracked automatically through Meet Echo, so no need to sign in if you're on site, but you do need to sign in to Meet Echo. Next slide, please. Sanjay, go for it.
This is the most important slide. You see, the only reason, if you're in Austria, you've got to visit the State Opera. And I was lucky to do that on Sunday evening. So I thought I'll just share that with you.
Nice, very nice, Sanjay.
Back to
Okay,
business.
so back to business. This is CDNI. Do we have a volunteer to be a Jabber scribe? I'm going to take minutes. And everyone, please log into Meet Echo to make sure that we have an accurate count for blue sheets.
Anyone in the room to volunteer for Jabber Scribe? I think Francesca is saying she'll do it. Thank you.
I don't think
Thanks so much.
there was much action. So, okay, thank you. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder of our milestones. Last time we did re-adopt the triggers and we adopted the footprints. So there's a new milestone there for the footprint draft. We'll be talking about that. Still on our list is finishing up URI signing, and Phil's going to give us an update on that. I don't see Phil online yet, but hopefully he'll be here. Acme Star, that's the HTTPS delegation. Fred is not feeling well, so Sanjay is going to take that update for us. And then Nir is here to talk about the triggers and the footprints. And then we have a packed agenda beyond that. Next slide, please. Chris Lemon's going to talk to us about the CTA wave stuff. We also have the other half of the HTTPS delegation that we split out last time. So Christoph's going to talk about that. And then we'll have updates on the metadata and capacity advertisements from Alfonso and Andrew. And hopefully we'll get all that in the next 2 hours and do a quick wrap up. And 30 seconds under my 5 minutes. So let's go ahead and get started. Is Phil here? I don't see him online. All right, Phil will be here. Let's, do we want to just go straight to Chris, or do we want to let Nir go? I'd like to keep the CTA wave and URI signing pieces together. So, Nir, do you want to go ahead and go?
Sure, why not?
Awesome, thank you.
Hold on a second. Let's see if I can bring the next slides. So Nir, we're going with your slides first, the CDNI footprint extensions.
Yes.
It's not showing up. Okay.
Would you like me to share with the screen? That I can also share screen if is possible.
Yeah, you can, but I should be able to bring this up here. Okay, it does, but it doesn't bring in the, okay, let's see. Stop share slide. Okay. This should work.
Now it's okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's start. Hi everybody. I'm Nir Sofer from Quilt. In the previous meeting and the meeting before it, we discussed an internet draft of additional footprint types, and we would like to get to the last call, the working group last call for this internet draft. Sandra, do you move the slides or?
Yeah, I should have. Why don't you go ahead, Nir? Looks like not letting me
Okay.
share here.
Sharing. I need your approval. I need one of you to approve my request.
It looks like Phil just joined. Do we want to go ahead and let Phil give his update?
Um,
Oh, your screen working?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you see my screen?
No.
So I might have permission issues.
yeah, I gave the permission.
No, it seems like
No?
oh,
Okay.
permission denied. No,
Okay.
it's a problem within the Mac. I need to approve it somewhere. So.
I'll try loading the slides. Let's let Phil go ahead since he's here now. And we'll go back to our regularly scheduled agenda. Cool. Phil, you're up.
We cannot hear you, Phil.
You're muted. Lots of technical difficulties today.
I don't see you here muted, Phil. See if on your end if you can reconnect. Right. It just shows. I don't see any video. I mean, yeah, I don't see the option for audio there. Okay. Phil, you have to do the unmute your audio if I guess that's probably the obvious thing. You may have already done that. Can't hear you. Yeah, did you do that, allow your browser and all that when you first started? He's shaking head, you did, yeah. Still no voice, Phil. Okay, maybe he's reconnecting.
Yes, Nir, do you want to go ahead? I have your slides up.
Let's go. Okay. So a quick recap. RFC 8006 define the footprint types and the footprint object. The footprint types are IPv4 or IPv6 CIDRs, ASN, country code. The footprint object is actually an object that allows to define a bit of footprint type and the values that the client can match to. Next. Thank you. And RFC 8008 allows to use this footprint and footprint object to specify on which footprint each capability is supported. So in the previous meeting, we suggested two new footprint types. Next, please. The first is the ISO 31662 code, which is the subdivision code, for example, states in the US, which this footprint type practically gives us a better granularity compared to country code. Next. And the second footprint type was the footprint union that allows that introduced additive semantics between different footprint types. And that's it. The internet draft, we had several comments, and thank you, Kevin, for start the shepherd review on the draft. There's no more action item as I'm aware of, so and nothing new to bring up here. If you these slides actually point to the last draft, I would be happy if we can proceed to the last call of this.
Thank you, Nir.
Draft.
Yeah, I think this one's pretty straightforward. It's just registering two new footprint types in the IANA registry. We've talked about it for a little while now. I don't think there's been any contention about it. I went ahead and did my Shepherd pre-review, as is our custom. I think assuming that all those were addressed, we're probably in pretty good shape. I don't know if anyone has any objections to us moving this forward to a working group last call. If so, please speak now. We will, of course, take it to the list after the meeting, but we wanted to have a quick discussion here to make sure everyone, I think there's pretty much agreement that we should just move this thing forward. Andrew supports it. Good. All right. So if there's nothing else on this one, Phil, are you back to having audio?
Looks like. I see the icon for audio and video.
Nope.
No.
Can't hear you. Gonna try one more thing.
Maybe change your browser.
All right. then we'll go ahead and load up Nir's other presentation. How's that sound? Since he's already here.
Okay. And the second draft we discussed in the previous time was the second edition for the controller interface. A quick reminder, the controller interface allows an absence CDN to manage content and content or metadata within the downstream CDN operations like preposition or invalidation. We suggested a new version for this RFC, Ori, Sanjan, and myself. Next. In this new version, we already discussed this added functionality, which is additional information in the error propagation, triggers extensibility, for example, time policy that allows the absence CDN to indicate that he wants the preposition be done at a specific time, and also define two additional content selection methods, which are the content regexes and content playlists. Next. And following the discussion, we reached the point we redefine the trigger object. So this is the original version of the trigger object. It has the trigger type, for example, preposition. It has the CDN path, the list of CDNs that actually instruct the operation. And it allows us to do some circuit breaking, and a set of properties that are practically used for target selection. Okay, the trigger should be applied on those metadata URLs or those content patterns, etc., etc. Next. So the trigger v2 object, first of all, was added with the trigger extensions list, which is a list of generic items that we can register more and more items as we go. And next, and was also added with two properties for content selection, which is the content regexes and playlists. Next, please. Thanks. So the point we got to is, okay, we ask what would happen if we want another method for content selection. And then as a separate property, we will need to define the trigger v3. And so we said, okay, why not do the same trick, use a list of generic objects for the metadata and content selection as well. So next slide. So what we practically want to do in this change is to take all the green properties that are used for target selection to say on which elements the trigger should operate, and put it in a list of generic trigger specs. Okay. Any questions so far? Two, three. Let's
Go
go
ahead.
Next. Okay. So we suggest a generic spec object which is specified targets to execute the trigger on. Okay, it's a generic object. We may have several types. For example, we already defined the types matching all the types from RFC 807, which are URL spec or URI patterns, as well as content playlists. Okay, and in the future we may add more and more types. And the spec is specified for a specific trigger subject. We define a new term which is called the trigger subject, which is either metadata or content. And maybe in the future we'll have something else. I have nothing in mind, but it can be done. Next. So if we look at the spec object structure, it has the spec subject, the type of the spec, and the values. So this specific example says match metadata with the following URL. Okay, we have metadata that is chosen using URL spec with this specific URL. Do I have a pointer here somehow? Okay, never mind. Okay, specific that match the specific URL. Questions? We'll see an example in a minute. Okay, one last change before I'm showing the example. Next, please. In the original RFC, there was a temp trigger type, which is preposition or invalidation or purge. It's actually specify the operation the trigger stands for, and I find it more appropriate to call it action. Okay, so I would like to have a rename this field and to call it action instead of type. Okay, so let's look at the example. Yes. So this is the trigger v2 object. First of all, it says, okay, the action is preposition, and we would like to preposition this following list. We would like to preposition metadata with this single URL, as well as content that matches those two URLs. Okay.
And so previously, this would have been two separate trigger requests, right?
No, it was a single request. There's
Okay.
this field called metadata URLs and metadata and content URL. So it was still in a single request. It was just you had to define the properties over and over again. So if we have you need to define metadata URL property and content URL property and change the trigger version is every time you define it. So
I see a queue here. I see a question from Rajiv. Rajiv, you want to go ahead?
Hi guys, hope you can hear me.
yes,
This is Rajiv from Kubernetes. I have a question here. You're talking about metadata and content prepositioning. Typically, when we do a content preposition, we are also prepositioning the metadata with it. But in this particular case, you have a case where you're prepositioning metadata for a parent path and content for child path. So, uh, does the URL spec type have any ability to do recursive or wildcard based, or is that only going to be on the specific URL system?
I'm sorry, I actually didn't. The line was a bit disrupted, so I wasn't able to hear properly.
So, and I'm just wondering, when we are doing a content preposition, we are typically doing both the content and the metadata, right? The metadata, when we do a metadata preposition, we are only doing the metadata and not the content itself. But in this particular example, you have used a parent part for the metadata and child parts for the content. So I just wanted to know how that interaction works and whether when we are doing metadata, that, does the URL spec trigger type have the ability to do something recursive, or is it implicit, or is it explicit in that it'll only do the specific listed URLs and nothing below that?
Actually, I would actually need to get back to you with this.
I think that if for metadata, if you ask for ABC, you'll get the metadata for ABC, but that will also have pointers to everything that's below it. And it may be implementation dependent on whether you choose to pull all the rest. at that particular
Okay.
time.
Okay, so you're saying that it's quite dependent on the exact metadata's definition of that particular object.
Right,
So
because
the
if
question
the
here is
metadata
if
stop,
there are, yeah, so if there are pointers in the metadata, would this the downstream CDN be expected to recurse through that and get all the metadata for the objects that it's pointing to?
that's a good question.
Again,
I don't know that we specify that. I don't know that we prescribe.
So yeah, so I suspect probably specifying that either explicitly make it a requirement, or if you want to keep the behavior identical between the metadata subject and the content subject, we clearly say that any recursion has to be explicitly requested by adding the child URLs. The downstream CDN wouldn't implicitly recurse. The reason I'm bringing up this question is because of this specific example where we have metadata and content preposition happening on different levels within the hierarchy.
Yeah, I would think it would be odd for the downstream to pull content for which it did not have metadata. Now, whether there should be an implicit pull of metadata based off the content preposition is an interesting question.
So again, it's probably something for discussion
Yeah.
on the list, maybe.
Yeah, I admit I failed to follow the details of this remark, but as I understand, it's not related to the structure of the trigger, or it's related to the specific example.
Yeah, example, and it's kind of related to the expected behavior of the downstream CDN when dealing with a preposition request.
Yeah, but it's a similar issue would have could have existed with the previous version of the RFC, with the 8007, where you already can define CIT metadata URLs and content URLs together. It's not a new. It's not a new item.
It's probably a use case that becomes more visible because of the new structure you're using, right?
Yes,
Because of the way it's kind of separated. Now it forces us to think this way, and it's more visible now. It probably wasn't explicitly visible in the earlier structure.
Yes, and we should somehow relate to that in the RFC.
Rajiv, can you also post your question in the mailing list? I think just so that we can make sure that
I will do that.
we're separating the structure part of it from the actual implementation piece of it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Any other question or comment? Okay, so let's proceed. Wait, back to the example. Sorry, one. So I want you to, I would be happy if you keep this example in mind, okay? We will relate to it later on. We have here a trigger of for preposition of a metadata with a single URL and content with two different URLs, okay? Let's move on. Okay, so similarly to the trigger V2, we needed to redefine the error object, actually practically define the error V2 object without the all properties related to content selection, to metadata like metadata URLs, etc. And we added the generic trigger spec list. And when we defined the status V2 object, which holds the error V2 object as well. So if we go to the next example, this is an example for an error V2 object, which in this case says that the error of type reject, that we encountered an error of type reject, and it's important to note that the error is relevant, is related to the
Sorry.
Yeah, the error is relating the spec listed here. Okay, so only the spec relevant to the error are listed in the spec list. Okay, so if you remember the example we showed before of the trigger, we had a metadata spec and a content spec. Here we have only the content spec. So the metadata, we had no error for the metadata. And if you remember, the URL list in the trigger had two URLs, and here we have only a single URL because the error only relates to this URL. With the other URL, everything went fine. Okay, so this is the semantic of the error. It is similar to the semantics of the error, the original error with the previous structure. One point, however, I find a bit of an issue here is it seems like a bit of a hassle to parse this error by the Absum CDN. Okay, to understand which object exactly was not the error relates to. It's maybe some string comparison or something like that. And I would like to suggest next a bit of an adjustment to the structure. Okay, so if we add some placeholders in the list, it may allow us to keep the position, or to take the trigger and the spec list from the trigger and add placeholders for saying, okay, for this object, everything went, the error is not relating to it, everything went well. So in this example, there is a spec list, and the first there is an empty spec, which practically means, okay, the metadata spec we had back then, everything was okay with it. The error does not relate to this spec. As well as if you are going into the spec itself, that the failing spec, there is again an empty object in the URL list, meaning, okay, this URL was okay. The error does not apply to it, and this may help the Absum CDN and better understand the error. So this is just a suggestion. The draft does not contain this change already, and I would be happy to hear your opinion about it.
So we have a queue here. Rajiv, you want to go first, and then Kevin?
Comments on this. One obviously is the fact that when you're using your first example in the previous slide, there is the chance of two levels of ambiguity which may come in. One, obviously, that you've already identified, the fact that you are only listing those specific specs where you have an error, and so in this case, you're nesting at the level of spec for showing the specs that have an error. But what you're actually doing is you're actually populating it with a partial spec when compared to the preposition request, because the request spec had two URLs and here you have a single URL.
Indeed.
So that is one question. The second one is, how do you expect, this error to be dealt with in cases where the error has happened at a URL that may not be part of the original spec? So so this obviously would not work with the spec type of URLs, but say if there's a spec type of playlist which you have added, okay? So part of that would mean the downstream CDN parses that playlist and brings all the dependent resources of that playlist into the preposition queue and populates them. And say, for example, on a playlist there's a subtitle file which is giving me a 404. The rest of the playlist is fine. I'm getting a 200 on the playlist. I'm getting a 200 on the AV segments. I got a 404 on the subtitle segment. Now that subtitle URL is something that where would I put that in this structure? Because that is something which is not explicitly mentioned in my incoming request, right? So we'd have to be a little more, intelligent in how we write this structure in order to allow for these kinds of errors to also be surfaced. And if we come to the next slide, there my point would basically be that you already have a status object, right? Is there any reason why we are using an explicit error object rather than just rolling the errors into a generic status object? And that generic status object is designed to exactly mirror the preposition request. So the request comes in, and as a status message basically in the request message, whatever file just gets a status okay, whatever file gets an error. So that way, literally 1:1 mapping between everything, what succeeded, what failed, without us having to put in hacks like trying to maintain position, or without necessarily having the upstream have to maintain a lot of state about what it sent so that it can match up when the response comes in. Just a two thoughts over there.
And so I again wasn't able to hear you well. I heard well the first element, the first part of the what you were saying.
I'm sorry, Neer, your voice is breaking up badly. Is it just me, or?
I
Yeah,
think your
I-
voice. I think maybe Rajiv, if you can turn your video off and see if that helps. If you can turn your video off. Okay.
because I was able to hear your the first issue you presented, and I think it's something we need to think of, the ability to say, okay, this playlist, not only the entire playlist failed, but only part of it, and it's add a significant complexity in for the definition of this API, I believe. And I think we need to think about it. The second, I was not able to. You were backing out from at my place at least.
What
When you
what Rajiv
described,
is saying is that instead of using, why don't we create a generic object instead of an error object? But I think that really is part of the RFC already, the error, and it's not a generic object in that sense. So I'm not quite sure if I got his full question,
No,
but
I was basically trying to say that instead of having a separate error object which only tries to communicate the specific errors, why don't we roll the functionality of reporting the error into a generic status object? So the status object is designed to, as closely as possible, mirror the structure of the incoming preposition object, the request, so that every spec that's in the preposition object is available in the status object. And each spec and each component of that spec has either a status okay or a status error. And if there's a status error, we have sub fields and sub objects inside that more granularly describe what error was encountered. The advantage of doing it that way is that the upstream CDN doesn't really need to maintain a lot of state, and especially because some of these transactions may be quite long-lived transactions. So if a upstream CDN is saying, hey, here's a set of 10 episodes playlist that I want you to pre-warm or preposition, okay, it may take 20-30 minutes for the downstream CDN to complete that operation before it can send a status back saying that, hey, this particular trigger has now been completed, right? So do you really want the upstream CDN trying to hold on to state for that long so that it can match up with an error message? Or if the complete status message comes back, it basically mirrors everything that was in the original preposition request. So the upstream CDN doesn't have to have a record of what it sent. The status message is fully self-contained.
yeah. First of all, the status object itself holds the trigger v2 object. Okay. Also,
Exactly.
It's already it's the trigger object is already part of the status object. It's resides in the error object, and the two appears. Both of them appears in the status object. So this is covered. What is not covered, you suggested also that we would have an arrow, a different object per spec. So for this spec, we have the status of this spec is like that, and the arrow for this spec is this is the arrow of this spec, and this is the arrows of this spec. And I believe that we can achieve that perfectly with if the upsizing wants to achieve that, it can actually break the request to several triggers. So it may have a trigger for the first spec and a separate trigger for the second spec, and that's it. So
Yeah. My point here is, even with a single spec, that happens. If it's a single playlist, it may be a playlist, say for example, a movie which has a quality ladder with 6 different qualities. So which means that's still going to take some amount of time for the downstream CDM to process before it can respond. So that's still a certain amount of state that the upstream CDN needs to maintain to be able to correlate the errors. So by joining the error object as a part of the status, in the status thing as a part of the trigger object itself, basically the response from the downstream CDN is the trigger object with status embedded inside it. So the upstream does not have to depend on any state. The status response has everything in it.
yes, but
I'm going to
how does this address? I think we should take it offline.
Yeah. I'm going to inject myself as chair and say that, Rajiv, I think it's a good discussion. If you have actually a proposal for an object, that might also help move the thing forward. But if we can take this to the list and have that discussion, that would be great. We're running a little behind schedule. So Nir, if we could try and push through the rest of this. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Let's proceed. Let's skip this one. Next. Yeah, thanks. The last important thing I want to discuss here is the footprint and capability objects relates to this control interface. So a downstream CDN may support some of the actions. It may support preposition and invalidation, but not support purge. But it may support those actions, but for different subjects. For example, preposition and invalidation and purge are supported for metadata, but for content, only preposition is supported. So, for example, and we would like to be able to state that. And we would also like to say for each such action, which extensions are supported. For example, preposition of content support time policy, but purge does not support time policy. And also, what is the target selection methods that are allowed? Okay, so for metadata, for preposition of metadata, you may use playlist, but for purge you cannot use playlist. Why? I don't know. Okay, but next. Okay, so what we try to do is define a structure that says that for a specific action on a specific subject, the list of supported specs are this list, and the list of supported extensions is another list. And of course, everything is subject to the footprint that the capability is specified to. So let's take a look at the object and an example. Okay, so the capability is built from a list of objects. Each object states the action, the subject, the supported specs, and the supported extensions. So in this example, we support only preposition of content and invalidation of content. Okay, no operation of metadata is available, no purge is available. Okay, and the specific preposition of content can be done using URL specs or CCID specs, and it supports time policy. However, invalidation does not support a time policy. It does not support any extension because the extensions list is empty or not appear, doesn't appear. And that's it. Do you have any question for this?
I think there's been good discussion here. I think everyone, please go and read the draft, and we'll continue the discussion on the list. I think this is good. There have been a lot of good updates to triggers, and I think we're making a lot of progress on making it better. So I'm excited by the discussion. If there are no other questions, thank you, Nir, and we'll give Phil another shot at this.
And
Did you have
Nir,
anything,
anything
Neil?
else?
that's it. Thanks.
Kevin, you want me to see if I can bring the slides up in the meantime while
Sure.
we get Phil to
Phil.
get back on? Phil, you still there?
New browser and I don't see the mic icon.
What I see is that your mic is muted.
Oh,
Maybe we come back at the end of the
Yeah.
other presentations. So
do you want to
let's,
go ahead and do Frederick's?
Yeah. So you probably have to drive that.
Yep. We can do that.
I'll just stand up here.
HTTPS delegation. Where is it? There we go.
Okay, so I'm just voicing Fred here. He could not make the meeting today as he was not feeling well. So the revision of the draft that is put out in the mailing list and also in the really the main change in this version 8 really is that it has been pretty much cleaned up and has been very much simplified. So what we really see is that this document is now aligned with RFC 9115. And so basically what 9115 prescribes is a pre-CDN conversation that can happen between a downstream CDN and an upstream CDN, where the downstream will create an account into this entity and will exchange the certificate information, et cetera, and all of that. So once all of that is done, really the only part that is required in this RFC is to be able to identify that what is the location from where the downstream CDN will go and fetch the certificate information. And all of the conversation has already happened before it. So there's no exchange of information other than that the HTTPS this draft will basically essentially only go out and make the request to pull the certificate from the upstream CDN. And that's what the change is really for this particular draft. So as you see here, the example ACME delegations and then the URL that has been already identified on which it'll go and retrieve the request from. So that really is the change. If you want to go to the next slide. And then we still have to talk through about security and privacy. the sense is that since this draft is not adding exposing any other metadata, so there's really not any additional security questions that come into play here. And the RFC 9115 and RFC 8006 already have addressed independently of this draft their security concerns that ensures that the metadata is preserved, or within the RFC 9115 that there's no other security leak. So I think this document by itself may not have anything that exposes the security and privacy concerns, but I think we still want to just talk through that, preferably in the mailing list, if you can review the draft and see if there are any questions or concerns that this draft should address with respect to security and with respect to privacy. So I think from the author's standpoint, the request is that if folks can review this draft, this version 8, and respond in the mailing list for any questions you have or you may have. And based on that, based on the progress, then maybe we can ask for the working group last call for version 8.
I think that it's much simplified now, which is good. I will go ahead and do the Shepherd pre-review on the new version, and hopefully everyone else can also go out and review it. It should be pretty straightforward now to move forward with it. I think we took out a lot of the other stuff about metadata and the harder stuff. So
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Anyone have any thoughts or questions? Otherwise, please review the draft. I will review the draft officially, and we'll try and move this forward by next IETF.
All right. Sounds good. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Sanjay. Is Christoph around?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Christoph from WordPeak. Yes, I'm going to present an update on this draft here on delegated credentials subsets. So the status of this draft is actually the result of a split of the previous draft that just has been presented. So the previous draft is about delegated certificates, and this one here is about delegated credential, which is ongoing work in the TLS working group. So this split has already been discussed in this group here in CDNI, and I would like to ask for adoption of this draft within the CDNI working group. So next slide. So currently what is in the draft, it's there are two objects which are defined, two MI objects. One is a conf delegated credential. It only contains a URL, and the idea is that the downstream CDN, when fetch or when accessing this URL, can download another object, and this other object is this delegated credential objects, which contains the delegated credential as defined in the subset internet draft, and also key material. So that's, so it's quite simple, those two objects, one which allows to just provide an URL, and the other which transports all the cryptographic material, let's say. So next slide. So there are a couple of things to do for this draft. So the first one is about aligning those two drafts, so the one on delegated certificates and the one on delegated credential, just about the advertisement, so that we have an FCI object which is a bit common, and which would allow to announce what is supported by the downstream CDNI, and could also allow to advertise additional parameters. there are sections about privacy and security that needs to be added. And then, but the main thing is about there's still an issue about this delegated credential object, which is not really an MI object as in the spirit of CDNI. So I have a slide on this in the next slide. And then there are also other things like currently in the current proposal, the public-private key is generated by the upstream CDN, and maybe this is not something that we always want to do. We should also support the case where the downstream CDN is generating this key and then asks for the delegated credential to the upstream CDN. Okay, next slide. So yeah, the open issue is that, well, this delegated credential objects is not really an MI object in the spirit of the RFC 8006, because it's not, well, it's not fetched as a normal MI object. This is fetched via this URL, which is defined in the configuration delegated credential objects. But if we remove delegated credential from this draft, well, there's no point of just keeping the delegated credential of the conf delegated credential object. And so there are different options on how to solve this issue. I mean, the issue is really about how can we fetch the delegated credential, how the downstream CDN can fetch the delegated credentials. So one could be to rely on an FCI object, which allows for the downstream CDN to announce the number of delegated credential it needs. And then the upstream CDN pushes the delegated credential via some MI object. But the problem here is that it's not really dynamic. We have to keep in mind that delegated credential have very short validity times, so we have to renew them regularly, and it's kind of the downstream CDN, each time it sees that a delegated credential is expiring, it has to fetch a new one, so we need really a dynamic mechanism. And the other option would be to, well, specify a dedicated interface which allow to fetch delegated credentials. So there either it's an interface somewhere in CDNI or SVA that needs to be defined. Maybe the trigger interface, I don't know, or something else, something dedicated to that, or by proposing an extension, so option B, in the ACME working group, which details how to fetch the delegated credentials. So this is something which is mentioned in the subcerts draft. But I don't know if the ACME working group would accept that, knowing that the idea and the interest of the delegated credential is that you don't need any CA anymore. So it's not really in the scope of the ACME protocol. So, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I wanted to really present all the options, this open issue, and have feedback, maybe on the mailing list, maybe today on the discussion, and to see how to move forward.
Thank you, Christoph. I know I owe you a response on the mailing list as well. I haven't responded to that email yet. I apologize for that. But Sanjay is in the queue. Sanjay.
Yeah, one quick question, Christoph. I think I'm not sure that this draft will really go into the ACME working group because it really refers to the subcerts, which is the work done in the TLS working group. So I think it would be better to sort of, if you're making use of the subcerts, then keep the focus clear that it really, any reliance it has is focused solely on that that RFC. The second point is that I noticed that the final version of that draft in TLS group has been submitted for RFC, though there's a slight change, and I don't know if materially that matters, but they're talking about that subcerts document will apply to DTLS instead of the TLS. And it may materially not matter, but I just wanted to call that out also, and I'm not sure if you have paid that attention to that part.
No, I haven't. I will have a look to understand the difference.
Okay, I'm gonna put myself in the list or in the queue. I think you know, I brought up this. It's not really a metadata thing. I still need to think about it more. I don't know that it makes sense to create an interface just for this. Maybe we can make an exception, but it is something separate. I am concerned about the security parameters of we're now going to be retrieving key material, and we need to be much more conscious of how we're doing that. And that
Yeah.
feels like a security area, not not an art problem, and we may get a lot of pushback on that if we try and specify something like that in here. We can specify the format, excuse me, right? All you're really doing is specifying the format and not who's going to set up this server to provide it. But it's a fine line, right? Now we're going to have to say what version of TLS are you going to use to pull this, and is that good enough? And I don't know that we want to go down that road, but I think everyone should take a look at the draft. And if you have thoughts or comments on where we should take it, please respond to the list, send your comments there, and we can try and take this forward. Now, as chair, we wanted to have a discussion quickly on whether or not we can go ahead and adopt this draft. This was a split out from an existing working group draft. I don't see a problem with us taking on this work since we already had the work, and we probably should move this work forward. But as a matter of protocol, we wanted to bring it up and say, hey, is the working group still interested in going down this road? I assume we are, but if anyone has any objections, please feel free to voice them now. We will, of course, go to the list and send out an actual adoption email and solicit feedback. But if there are no objections here, we will go ahead and start that process. All right, I think we're good. Christoph, anything else you wanted to add?
That's all on my side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to give Phil another shot. Nope, no audio.
Okay, so do we want to hear the access token, or we want to wait until after? If Phil can.
Well, okay, let's let Chris go. Let's go ahead and let Chris go and give Phil another shot at.
Okay. All right, my audio working?
Yes.
Well, yes.
Fantastic.
And video too.
All right, and you got my slides up. Excellent.
Yes.
I'm going to try to move a little bit quickly through this so that we have time for at least a couple of questions. This is going to be the Common Access Token. Next slide.
Yep.
And we're going to start out. I want to talk about who's doing this, what all we're doing, and how that relates to the URI signing that is being worked on in this group, and why this group might care. Next slide. So this work is coming out of the CTA Wave project, and the primary use case is for streaming media, although the token itself is a little bit more general. And the goal is to find a single token that covers all of the existing usages in the industry from all of the CDN specific tokens that are in use today. Next slide. So talk a little bit about how this is different from the URI signing that this group is doing. The Common Access Token is CWT based. So it's going to be smaller, terser, and is a little bit faster to parse for CDNs. There are more musts for the intermediaries that receive these tokens. And so the idea is to kind of draw a very, very firm fence around what needs to be supported in order to claim common access token support and provide strong guarantees so that issuers can issue tokens knowing that any intermediary can process it. Obviously, there's going to be no built-in support for delegation. It's not part of a larger CDNI or other interconnect effort. It is just a token, but it does generally have more claims with greater complexity. Next slide. All right, we have just like the URI signing token. It has encrypted claims in order to protect the privacy of the end user. But unlike it, instead of putting it as a base64 string, it uses a cozy object directly. This saves processing time and is and saves a lot of space. Avoids repeated base64ing. Unfortunately, this means it can't use the subclaim because that's a string, and this needs to be a cozy object. We'll get onto more of that in a minute. Next slide. So it also has some additional claims. The first few are really trying to draw a box around any request information that intermediaries or providers are likely to use in order to determine what content is returned. So the HTTP method has a claim on it so that you can specify that the token is valid for get but not put and not post, for example. And the ALPN is actually an extension of the fact that you can adjust based on scheme. And so there are tokens that claim HTTPS but not HTTP using the regular expression on the URI. We wanted to extend that to the ALPN more generally. And then there are a number of headers, including an arbitrary number of unspecified headers that servers can use to return differing information. They are, of course, well advised to use the vary header appropriately here. But yes, having a regular expression on arbitrary headers. We have some geography claims that we're still working out the details on. We have a claim for the TLS public key. This allows you to use for the tokens something similar to what OAuth does with MTLS, self-signed certs, wherein if you use a certificate, even a self-signed certificate, to acquire an authorization token by whatever means you provide credentials to get authorization tokens. The issuer can bind your public key to the token it gives you, and the intermediary can guarantee that the certificate you present it matches the token, so that if your token is stolen, then it can't be used without your private key as well. We have nestable compositions for and, or, and nor, and that drastically increases the flexibility of the token and increases the language that issuers can use. And lastly, we have actions that modify the rejections. So there are situations where when a token is rejected, the issuer wants a very specific status code and some headers to be returned. And we're still workshopping exactly what this is going to look like. But the idea is that this will allow issuers to define these rejections directly. Next slide. Okay, another difference is that we have some strong types on these claims. So for example, the critical claim here is an array of claim numbers, claim numbers and strings. Encrypted claims are of a cozy encrypt type directly. Network claims are going to be it's going to be a CBOR array of RFC 9164 tags. Other claims are going to have appropriate types. This will reduce the amount of parsing of strings and error handling that has to happen post well-formed validation. Next slide. So let's talk about why we in this group might care about it, or we might not. So like the ALPN method and headers, those are just general URI signing claims. They're applicable to any sort of a token like this. Compositions, encrypted subject, critical claim, those aren't even specific to URI signing. They are literally just generic COOT claims. These are potentially generally useful. Maybe it's useful to try to define them generally in a broader sense. Next slide. There's overlapping utility. All URI signing tokens can be represented as cats here, and any successor token is likely to use at least some of these. I don't see a whole lot of energy for any sort of successor token to the wonderful and delightful token that this group has that satisfies the needs. But if there ever were, it's likely that such a token would overlap heavily with at least some of these claims. Next slide. So there's no real takeaway here. This is no action items. This is noodles for your noodle machine and some public domain cats. And I wanted to leave at least a few minutes of time for questions about what this token is and what it's doing.
Kevin.
So, I guess, how far along is the development of this, and do you see adoption of it, and do you think that it will go anywhere, or whether or not, URI signing token will it also go somewhere, or will it fall by the wayside because this thing is more, I guess, does this add a whole bunch of stuff that people want, or does it just add a whole bunch of stuff? You know what I mean?
It definitely adds it definitely adds a bunch of stuff that people want, and it adds some stuff. And which category, which thing is in depends based on the use cases. So like there are some folks with zero interest in any of the TLS stuff. And there are folks that are like, no, that enables my very specific use case. And so there's a lot of drive towards adoption on this. And that's why this work is happening in the CTA. That there's a group of people there that represent a variety of intermediaries and providers that that have a lot of energy towards this, and they're really pushing for something that will be genuinely implemented across a wide variety of intermediaries. And so, the goal is to codify the feature set that people are already doing, so that nobody has to give up features by switching tokens, right?
And do you think that this is something we should liaise with, or is it just be aware if we choose to take forward URI signing, if we don't ever do anything else with URI signing, then they can go and do what they want?
Yeah, I think that some sort of a liaison probably makes sense. There's a lot of overlap in participation already, which is a valuable thing. I think there is if the cat takes off and URI signing token does not, for whatever reason, it may at some point be valuable to define an interface layer between the URI signing token and the cat that allows people to use the cat for CDNI delegation, right?
We may want a metadata at least, or something to support it.
Right.
Got it.
And now, if we ever want to take on that work, there are other questions we have to ask. And a lot of the musts around this were intentionally left out of the URI signing draft because there was not a desire to force all of the intermediaries to implement all of these features in order to do CDNI.
Right.
And the goal here is to create genuine interoperability. And May is the bane of an interoperable system, right? So if we ever do that, there is definitely going to be some questions. An issuer can express anything that they need to express in a CAT, but there are more requirements on an intermediary supporting a CAT than there would be on supporting a URI citing token.
Got it. Sanjay.
Yeah. So Chris, before you were put on the agenda, I did see that there was some support in the mailing list about you talking about it. So I'm glad you did that, and you clarified some of the questions that Kevin was asking. Moving forward, and you also mentioned about implementation, so that's an important thing. So I'm wondering if you want to keep us sort of apprised, maybe in July when we meet, to see where you are, other companies are, if there's any implementation, and maybe if there's anything that you made use of out of the URI signing. So would like to hear more about it and see where you are at.
Yeah, I can certainly keep the group updated. And yeah, there's no surprises. The structure is very similar. They're Coots versus Jutes. It's the same roots at the core. There are only a few obvious ways to express these sorts of things.
Pankaj.
Thanks for the chance. I just wanted to say that to the earlier question, there is definitely very, very heavy interest from content providers and the CDN in the ecosystem of content delivery to support a common scheme. Right now, the ecosystem is extremely fragmented, and CAD has the benefits of flexibility with these logical claims that can be put together with ands and ors, but also the conciseness of that, which helps with the performance, which is extremely critical for the CDN vendors.
Thank you. Anyone else have any comments on this? Phil, are you back?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Say again, Phil?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
We can hear you.
Finally. It took you
So-
only, what, hour and 15 minutes?
MeetEcho thinks it has something to do with the UDP session initiation, but oh, this is amazing. I can see all kinds of little wave things going on over there. All right, sorry. So my thoughts on this. I love standards, things that are generic that can be used by more people. I think that's why we changed URI signing to be JWT instead of all the query param stuff that it was in the beginning. If something like this comes along that fills that gap better than URI signing, I'm all for it. I think URI signing was something that came along because there was nothing else that did it. But if there's a more generic solution for it, I like it. And I think the puns are going to work out, the memes are going to work out a lot better for CAT than they will for URI signing.
Excellent. Oh, funny, Andrew. I got it. All right, Phil, do you want to talk about URI signing real quickly?
Sure. So the issues that Ben had with it, there was one minor clarification he wanted to see, which I added, and he was happy with. The other point was having to do with delegated shared keys, going from CSP to UCDN. He was fine with it. Was from UCDN to DCDN that he did not like. And I wrote to the mailing list and nobody really replied, and we decided to just go ahead and correct it. So what I did was remove the explanation of how to do it, and like there were a couple places where it was like, oh, and you can do this here, and I just removed that part. But I did not remove the concept entirely. because I did not want somebody to rediscover this and say, oh, this is a great and clever idea I've come up with and let me implement this. And instead I put that they should not do this. Ben is still concerned that that's in there at all, and that it's should not versus must not, I guess. I was torn on this. I thought about this for a while before I went with should not. And mostly because I felt like we had no recourse. Like if we say you must not do this, or else what? Like they can do it in the background. It's already out of band. There's nothing that it's breaking. There's no way to detect it or stop it. So I just said you should not do it. I think he wants it to be must not. I'm super open to that being a better route. I just didn't know if I had a solid argument to make. So please give me the grounds to stand on, and I will gladly make that change.
I see Francesca up on the mic here. So Francesca.
Hi, Phil. About the should not, something that should be noted is that it's not enough to say should not and let the reader decide that what level this is, like how required or recommended it is to not do this, or there needs to be text around. And I haven't reviewed the text, so I'm not sure at the moment if there is enough text about that, but it needs to be clear what the consequences are of implementing this. And in ideally, should not means that there are the writer foresee cases where this is allowed, and this could be like corner cases or situations in which you cannot do differently than actually using this mechanism. And that's what the should and should not is for. It's for allowing these corner cases and describing the context and maybe examples in which this is acceptable. And yeah, this is we see this a lot in ISG evaluation, where we consider is it must or should really, and I think it applies here as well. So maybe that could clarify a bit Ben's point about why the should maybe is not enough to him. I don't know if it helps at all, but I see the point of not wanting it to remove it completely and then someone reinventing it. It really depends on the actual text that is around this should not, in my opinion, how strong it is and how well described it is.
Okay, yeah, I don't see any valid use cases other than people who implementers saying, no, I really want to use shared key and I really want to use this. And I think we've said a ton of stuff about not doing it and why not to do it. There's things in the security consideration. I can always add more. I'm always open to that. I really was on the fence. Somebody jokingly sent me, I forget what RFC it is now, but it was an April 1st RFC that had really should not and ought not to. Yeah. And I really, I kind of really should not is what I wanted to put there, but I was like, oh no, this is obviously a joke, but I was really on the fence, and I guess maybe I'm just misinterpreting the should versus must more as plain English versus what the RFCs state, and so maybe must not is the right thing, and I can make that change. I discussed it with some people, some experienced IETFers, and they didn't even have a definitive answer. One of them said start with must and see where you go, and the other one said start with should and see where it goes. So I can just change it to must, or must not, rather, just to be clear.
Yes, and if the working group has an opinion, that's very valid. To have this conversation and decide and have a consensus call by the chairs, that is going to motivate putting either must or not, must or should there. That would help. So if I'm also I will have to look at the text again to have a more definitive opinion. But yeah.
I think our I mean, the whole time it's been, there are people who do this, right? We know that they shouldn't do this, but there are people who do this, and we didn't want to, completely lock them out. But and maybe it's okay to say must not, and they can still go and do it. There's nothing preventing them from going and doing it, right? But I guess the stance of the IETF should be to do something secure and not allow them to do something that's unsafe, right?
Like that could be described in the document without normative language, and say like we are aware that exist, and this is not recommended, or like yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of this is not recommended language in it already. I think Ben really wants me to put must not, like just do not do this. It is outside of the specification if you do, which I think is fair. I think it's fair.
Any other comments?
Francesca has one more comment, I think.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So from a process point of view, I just wanted to say that Ben will be stepping down the ASG tomorrow, so his blocking discuss will disappear. But I hope that we can still, get his input, and even though it's not going to be like actually blocking the document, I hope that we can still get his, like informal approval of some sort. But yeah, we should get to a consensus in the working group and then move forward.
From my perspective, I definitely respect his opinion and would like to have him on board with it. So I can totally agree with that. And he's been very helpful in finding issues with the document in general that we fixed up. So
I'm okay with going must not. Phil, I'll leave it to you to decide. I'll go and review the text again. Everyone else, please also, if you have some cycles, review the text again, and if you have thoughts or feelings on it. And we can really try and get this one finished up and out the door once and for all. Thank you, Phil. Thank you for the perseverance in getting us your audio. We appreciate it.
yeah, sorry for wasting so much time, but glad it finally got through.
Thank you, Phil.
All right.
All right, we've got 30 minutes, and we've got 2 more topics to cover here.
Yep.
But I think we have enough time. So I think next Alfonso goes. Alfonso, you good?
Yeah.
And I'll bring up your slides. Just give me a second here.
Okay. Thank you,
If you can try and fit it in 15 minutes to give Andrew time, that would be great.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
know. Yeah, I will try.
Sorry, we lost the order here. So there it is. Capacity. There it is.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I will try to go quick on the first part of the slide deck because it's a recap of something that we have explained. Oh, Glenn Grunstein was the person that was presenting this in the last meeting. So please, next slide. Yeah, next, please. Yeah, so just why we presenting this this draft to this group. As all of you probably know, in the Streaming Video Alliance, there is the Open Catching Working Group, where is gathering different perspective of the streaming video business, where you have the content providers, you have commercial CDNs, or you have service providers, in that they have the common interest of bringing the best quality of experience for video delivering these video services to end users. So we working on trying this effort of having the best quality of experience. This is why we work together to create try to get integrations more efficient, try to get some standardization of how the different processes of the video delivery goes from the content provider to the end users, all through all these different roles or techniques, technologies, etc. So please, next. So at the first, the SBA Open Caching Working Group was paying attention of the CDNI interfaces and metadata definitions of the different RFCs, like 8006, 007, and 8008. But there was a finding that it was probably needed to cover some gaps, that trying to put all this together for these video service deliveries, the interfaces were not, or metadata interfaces were not enough to cover all those needs from content providers, from the CDNs, or for the service providers. This is why we were working on this extending the metadata that come from this group to try to cover all the needs from the different members of different roles in the video delivery, trying to define useful methods to make the configurations, try to automate the configurations, to put this in place with our current implementations and deployments in real life, and extending with more advanced configuration publishing capabilities that are required by content providers, trying things like publishing, versioning of configurations, and things like that. Please, next. Yeah, well, this is very quick. This is a representation of the metadata model of the 8006. And just I will be very quick. We haven't touched any of this main structure of the metadata model, but we leave our proposed extensions in the as generic metadata objects. So we're taking leverage of this infinite extensibility that the interface permits on the metadata. Please, next. Yeah, so at the end, all what you have in the orange background are the different categories that we are adding or we're trying to add with this extension to the metadata model from the CDNI. We will come in a minute for that. Please, next. So as a summary, I think yeah, we can go later on this. Pass, please, Sanjay. Yeah, one of the things that are included in this draft is what we call in processing stages. That is a way to permit to intervene in the different processes that happens when the user agent is requesting a content to a CDN or a downstream CDN, sorry, and how that process will go to an upstream CDN origin to get the response back from the upstream, and that response goes to the user agent by the downstream CDN. These processes that we here identify as 4 steps, from the client request, origin response, and client response, we defining a way to intervene on those processes. So a downstream CDN is able to make transformations on different parts of the request. For instance, modifying the headers that goes to the origin when trying to get the object that is requested, or we are able, or we could be able to modify a header in the response to the client, and any other transformation that could be required for the different use cases that are required for this traffic delegation. Yes, next. Yeah, well, this is I will not pay time here now. It's just a representation of the processing stages model. All this live in a generic metadata object that is defined in the draft. So please, next. And this was an example of the host index representing the generic metadata MI processing stages. And in this example, you can see that we use an expression match that is defined in the draft as a metadata expression language where for a condition in this case that is the response from the origin is 200, then we will modify the cache policy for that specific object. So this is an example of what we intend to do with this. Next, please. Yeah, and again, well, there is a definition of the expression language with the different operators, variables, or even built-in functions that could be used for all these modifications. Please, next. In terms of the capabilities interface, we have in this draft have been defined a few new objects that are required to the downstream CDN be able to announce to the upstream the different capabilities regarding these new extensions for the metadata model that could be required for the upstream to know. So, for instance, it's important. It could be important for the upstream to know that the processing stages is available or not, or even it could be important to the upstream to know that a subset of the processing stages is the downstream CDN is capable for. For instance, it should be important to know the downstream CDN to know if the expression language is supported in the downstream CDN or not. Maybe it's not, but maybe it's able to do some processing stages replacement without expression language. So there are some conditions here that the FCI interface could not only announce the capability of a complete object, but of a part of an object. Please next. Yeah. Yeah, I will not stop here. This is something that will come probably next. So this is not changing in this draft version regarding this, but we just for you to know, the SBA and the Open Caching Working Group is working on try to extend the metadata model with new features regarding an advanced publishing method that permit the content provider a better management of the configurations. So probably this is something that will come in the following meetings. So please, next.
I'm going to insert myself in the queue here
Yeah,
real quick.
sorry, Sanjay.
So I see that you have uploaded the new revision of the draft, right?
Yep.
So based on, and I think you have addressed some of the comments that were posted from the last meeting in that draft. I see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Next, please. Yeah, so well, that we are version 2. What's changed from version 1 to version 2? One of the comments that came from the last meeting is that it could be good to have a categorization of the different generic metadata objects that we are including with this extension. That was a very fair point. So we have made this categorization. We have separated different metadata objects with what these sections like cache control or metadata related to cache properties management. Here's the list of the different objects in this category. The origin access, metadata related to the acquisition of the content. Client access control. In this version of the draft, there is no generic metadata object yet, but because this is something that we in the Open Caching Working Group are working on different options, different objects for this client access control, but they're not finished yet, so we haven't included in the draft. But I think it would, we think we will good to have it in the as a category here, even and it's empty now, but we will have different objects in the next version of the draft. Edge control, generic metadata to inform processing of responses downstream. So it's a way to the upstream to condition the way the downstream CDN could respond to a user agent request in the edge. So this could include something like we will see that in a moment for the cross-origin policy, for instance. There were some doubts in the last meeting. So the upstream is able to somehow say the downstream CDN to independently of information that came from the upstream CDN origin to enforce some functionality to the end user request. Okay. Processing stages as a complete category for itself, and in general metadata it's where we include other objects that are not we haven't found a category of the others categories to where to put in there. Okay, please next. Yeah, we have added examples to every genetic metadata object because it was something that in the version 1 I think there weren't examples. We have included some minor changes in the metadata expression language, but there is no change in the built-in operators or variables parts, but it's just about the syntax in the object, in the JSON object. There is more detailed description for processing stages. We have removed from the draft the MI requested capacity limits. That is something that goes in the other draft that Andrew will be presenting in a moment. So we decided to put this out of this draft as the capacity inside draft have their own definition of MI object that will be extending the 8006. And we added corrections from the previous version that was detected in the revision from the members. Please next. So I will just go directly, if for the sake of the time, to some of the main doubts that were in the previous meetings. I'm open to discuss any other or in questions if you want. Here I have added in the presentation in the first column the section of the version 1 and the section for the section 2, so version 2, sorry, because we have categorized all the objects, then section numbering has completely changed. So yeah, for the sake that you can find the reference of the previous questions on the last meeting. So I will go to the section 232, the third line there, about the allo compress. There was a concern about this object from Kevin, and yeah, there was a very fair point of the doubt here. The thing is that we have found that this object allo compress, that we still have it in the version 2 of the drafts with that name does not reflect correctly the function that is expected for a upstream CDN to use this object. The idea of this object, of the functionality, is that the upstream CDN enforces the downstream CDN to compress a response to the end user if the user has sent the access encoding header correctly, but independently if the origin has sent the response to the downstream uncompressed. So it's like delegating the compression of an object in the downstream CDN in the response to the end user, independently of what the origin is doing. Okay, probably this will have made the upstream to not dedicate resources to the compression and delegate that to the downstream CDN. Okay. So for sure, the name allo compress is confusing. We are working on changing that name, so we still don't have a final name with this. But something like edge compress or force compress will be more suitable for the use case that is expected for this object. So probably we'll change in the next version of the draft. For the next section 211, the cache policy, and there is another one in the next slide that is the negative cache policy. This is something similar related to what the origin is doing in the upstream and what the upstream CDN wants the downstream CDN to do. All these cache policies are related to cache control headers in the responses. Typically, the origin could send a cache control that is the same that should be sent to the end user, right? But the thing is that there are use cases where the upstream wants the downstream to have a different behavior regarding the cache. In these cases, it's regarding the time to live of the objects in the downstream CDN cache. So independently of what is sent to the end user in the response to the request, the upstream needs to say the downstream to change the way that it's behaved the cache. So there are some examples that we have found in real life in our production services deployed. Is like For instance, an upstream wants to have a cache control 0 or no cache no store for the local cache in the end user, but they don't want to receive a huge amount of requests from the downstream. So they prefer to maintain in a downstream a TTL of, let's say, 1 minute, while the end user receive a no cache no store. Um, why the upstream could do that? Because at the same time, the upstream using the CDNI or any other method available is able to make content management of the downstream. So they don't need that the downstream continues revalidate the object, because if they need to change the object, they can use the content management to do that. And that way the downstream block or stop the huge amount of requests from the end users and is not disturbing the origin server. So these cache control policies or the negative cache control policies is intended for that. So a way to change the behavior of the downstream in terms of the TTL of the objects without changing what is intended for the end user request. So please next, Sanjay. Yeah. This section, this is 2311, is regarding the cross-origin policy. The doubt from here from Kevin was in the description was not very clear. We have tried to change the description to have a more clear understanding of the reason of this. The cross-origin policies that this came from the fetch HTTP fetch standard. The definition of what comes in the origin header in a request when there is a fetch in the browser or in a player, in a client that is making the request, the origin header is included in that request and is not the service URL. It's not what is defined in the host index or in a host match, because the upstream one is delegating a host match, is delegating the service of the request for a video content, for instance, or for another object. But the origin header is related to the URL of the or how the client access that content in a video platform or in a web page. So in an example, the client could access the video platform.example.com, but the host match is videodelivery.example.com. So the request goes to videodelivery.example.com. That would be the host match that is delegated, but the origin header included by the browser or the player could be videoplatform.example.com. So in that case, we cannot relate the course with the host match, because it's not going to be that. It's going to be where the content is published publicly on internet. So why it's the schema and the domain name and port is because that is how it's related in the HTTP fetch standard. Well, we have tried to explain this better, so hopefully it's more clear now. So whatever you can find later, we can discuss.
Can we wrap up quickly?
Yeah, we'll
kind
try
of
to finish. Yeah. Yes, next. I'm trying to find something more important. Catch policy is explaining before. Yeah, some correction. Yes, please. Next. Yeah, there are some questions about including something in the registry for different options. One was for the private features. My point here is that private features is something that is more point-to-point, so from one specific upstream to one specific downstream CDN, because our private features probably from the downstream. So I don't think it's needed to have a private, public registry for those private features because of that, because I think they are not generic by definition. There was another comment regarding the traffic type. This is a generic, this is a video specific configuration. We're talking about generic, probably generic registry. We can discuss later if you want by the mailing list. I think it's a good point. There is here an explanation, but we can discuss. So please next. Yeah, and that's it. Very quick. I'm sorry for the sake of the time, but please, I'm more than welcome to use the mailing list for whatever other comment that you want. And in the last slide, please, Sanjay, there is where we find that in this draft version is good enough to plan to have this adopted as a working group draft, or there are still concerns, maybe we can use the mailing list to discuss around this. Thank you.
What I would suggest is that if you can put those questions that Kevin had and the answers you have in the mailing list, I think that would, at least create a record there, and
Yeah.
so
Okay.
others, that have similar questions may be answered it in that manner,
For
and then
sure.
we can, take up your question of adopting this into the mailing list. Kevin,
Okay.
what do you think?
I think thank you for the updates. I haven't had a chance to go over the full draft. The groupings are great. I think that the other thing then is, do we want to break it up into multiple drafts? Right now it's a 90-page draft and there's a lot of stuff in there. And there are things we could probably accelerate. Some of the metadata are probably easier to push through if we do them as separate pieces. Some of the stuff that's more fleshed out, we should consider that, I think, versus the mono draft, which is very hard, and especially with the stages, which I think are interesting. I think that's good stuff, but that is going to take a lot longer, I think, than just pushing through some of the metadata, if that's helpful to you guys.
Okay. Okay, we will discuss it then with the other co-authors what we can plan to do with breaking out in different drafts. Okay.
Thank you, Alfonso.
Thank you.
Great job. All right, last but not least, Andrew, you have the remainder of the time.
Saving the worst for last. I'm gonna,
That's for the last.
yeah. I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to skip a lot of the context and backstory and just kind of go right into the changes to the time. Sanjik, next slide, please. So this is the specific version of the draft we're considering. It's the Capacity Insights Extension version 2. Next slide, please. As part of this, the draft has actually been simplified a bit. We've cut out one of the main concepts, which was allowing an upstream to ask the downstream to reconsider capacity limits. We weren't necessarily confident in the approach we were taking, so we decided to strike it out just to make it a little more clear and concise. Next slide, please. So the component that was related to that, which was struck out, is the MI requested capacity limits object. Once again, we just didn't feel we had a good enough grasp on how it would be used effectively to communicate or allow the upstream to ask the downstream to reconsider adjustments. Next slide, please. This represents one of the two extensions we're looking to make to the FCI capacity limits payloads. This is the capacity limits. It is the main driver for allowing a downstream to communicate to an upstream of utilization goals they should be targeting. Next slide, please. This is the delta of the JSON structure from the last draft. On the left, you'll see that there were some hard-coded sections of total limits and host limits. We've decided to try and genericize that slightly by moving those over into generic limits objects and then adopting a new subscope to those limits. So you can see here on the right-hand side, there is a scope object, which is of type published host with several values. This allows a more granular scoping of a capacity within a CDNI footprint. Sometimes that we found that wasn't necessarily granular enough to meet certain needs. So we decided to allow within that footprint a subscoping. And this is the vehicle that we've identified for that. Next slide, please. This object hasn't changed since the last version of the draft. This is an object which is meant to advertise telemetry source capabilities. And this is relevant in that the capacity limits we're advertising, we felt that there was a strong correlation with correlating that to a telemetry source. So there was no ambiguity between what capacity advertisement we're specifying and how to measure the utilization against that limit. So this is really a foundation for further work, which we have yet to put forward. But we felt it was very relevant in this case and wanted to lay the foundation for it here. Next slide, please. Once again, this is a diagram from the last presentation. Just kind of goes through the overview of how we anticipate this to work. Really, the upstream would be polling the downstream to ask for the capabilities of, and within those capabilities, we would include capacity limits. The upstream would then also be looking to consume telemetry data that related to the specific capacity limits, combine those 2 data points together to make sure that there's sufficient sufficient capacity in order to delegate requests to the downstream. Next slide, please. Once again, this is the diagram which shows how the downstream would reflect changes to capabilities to the upstream. Relies upon a callback mechanism and a subscription service handled by the upstream and the downstream. Next slide, please. Once again, this is just a call out to the fact that we had removed the MI requested capacity limits object from this version of the draft. And next slide, please. And that is it. All right, I made it in 5 minutes. All right.
Good job, Andrew.
Thank you.
Any comments? So I encourage everyone, I haven't had a chance to look at the updated draft myself. Everyone, please go out and read the updated metadata and capacity drafts and send comments to the list, please. I think we should see, you know, if we can get some more comments out there, have more people discuss the draft, and then we can talk about whether there's, you know, appetite in the working group to adopt this work and take it on. Any other final comments, Andrew?
No, that was it.
Okay, thanks so much. We have 3 minutes left to wrap up. Sanjay, anything you want to say? My comment is I hope to see everybody in person at IETF 114. It's good to see people back in the rooms. And I am happy. Thank you for everyone who came and presented. Thank you for, you know, bearing with us through some technical difficulty. We got through it all, and I appreciate all the hard work from all of our authors. Sanjay.
Yeah, I echo your comments, and I think there's good progress, and I would like to see, you know, Andrew, you know, sharpen up this draft so that, you know, we can bring it back here and take a poll on it. And likewise, Glenn and team, everybody has done a lot of work on the metadata. So Alfonso, you know, you have the action item here to try and move that draft. Maybe, you know, as suggested, that may break it up into smaller pieces. So I think that might be able to, we might be able to kind of look at it easily and move forward with those drafts. So yeah, I hope to see everybody in person. The next one is in July, almost end of July, 3rd week of July in Philadelphia. So maybe easier for some, not so easy for others, but I know Francisca would not be able to join us there. She's going to be on maternity leave then. Wish her all the best, but keep up the work here because there's a lot of stuff going on. So a lot more to come, I guess, in the next IETF. But before we end, we've got about a minute left. Francesca, anything you want to add? She says no. She's all good, I think. Thumbs up. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone. See you in Philadelphia. Take care.
All right. Thank you, everybody. that Chris still at the back?
Hello.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
All right.
Good to see
I
you.
recognise people through masks. I figured you must be here somewhere.
Yeah, good to see you. How are you?
All right, yourself. Yeah.
Good, good. Well, finally we get to at least meet.
Indeed. Just put a bottle of water in there. I find yourself drinking as an excuse to take off the mask.
I know.
So, you all right?
Yeah, yeah, doing well, yeah. I don't know, it's just Tuesday and it feels like already a long week.
Yeah.
For some reason. Was that?
When did you arrive?
I got here on Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So you passed the jet lag yet?
I did, but I'm just like feeling again something today, but I'm good, it's just, I have to just myself to not stay up late in the night